Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Well, in life, if you want to be happy, part of the secret is having boundaries, putting up, call them blocks, or what you will accept and what you won't accept. That certainly holds true if you are a caregiver. Actually, it looks a little bit differently when it comes to those boundaries. You need them. We all need them in all areas, especially if you're a caregiver. I found somebody who is a coach for caregiving. Didn't know it existed until I met her. And she helps people navigate every aspect of being a caregiver. And many of us are doing it, especially as our parents get older. Marika Humphreys is here with us. Welcome. How are you doing today?
I am doing well. Yes, we had a little sunshine come out in Washington, so that's always a cause to celebrate, even though and it's July now. We joke that Washington summer doesn't start until July in Washington, so it's
Yeah.
very different. I know, depending on where you live, but here it's like we anxiously await summer. So yes, I'm doing well.
And when we say Washington, we're talking about state, not DC, right? Yeah. And
Correct.
I got you. I
Yes,
have a friend,
Washington State.
my,
Yes.
my friend's in Maine, kind of the same situation, just different sides of the country where,
Yeah.
oh, summer starts in July and autumn starts at the end of September.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. It's a very short period of time.
Yep.
I'm from California where the sun shines a lot more, and
Uh,
so moving up here, I have just gained a whole new appreciation for the sunshine that I
gotcha.
ever never had before.
Well, let's keep the sun shining and talk about this thing called boundaries. And thank you as our professional of the year. You have so much insight on caregiving. Uh, Boundaries are important, especially in self-care, but even more important when you're caring for somebody. Give us the lay of the land when it comes to those boundaries.
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways you can think about boundaries, and specifically for caregivers. There's two areas that I think it comes up for a lot. One is around our time and our expectations around ourselves. And that is more of a boundary you set for yourself. You can also think of it maybe as a limitation or kind of an expectation you set for yourself. So, and why I think that's super important is I think in caregiving, depending on who you're caregiving for, it can be very easy to try to just kind of do all the things, be everywhere, be everything for that person. And that's the quickest road to exhaustion and burnout. And it's just not super sustainable. But it's natural, especially if you're caregiving for someone you love. But even if it's, I mean, we all have sometimes complicated relationships with the people we caregive for. I think there's this idea we have a lot of like, I should be this and I should always be available and I should not take any time. So that's one type of boundary. And we've talked a little bit about that in the show, just in general. But the other type of boundary that I think is also really helpful or useful to have clarity around is the boundary that you set in relationships. And what I mean by that is like when someone says or behaves in a way that either you don't like or is just really hard to be around. And I'll give you an example, and how to set a boundary around that versus making a request. So when I talk about this, the biggest example I use is from my own situation. My late husband just he struggled with, as he had cancer, and as it progressed, he just became very angry. And most of that anger was not ever directed at me, but sort of at things in the world, in our home. I mean, he just, it was I think just a natural expression of the emotion he was feeling
Mm.
with cancer and how it impacted his body. But it was really hard for me to be around. And I didn't at the time, didn't do it very well at the time, but I basically tried to always soothe his anger. Now, though, in that type of situation, and it could be yelling, it could be other, you can think of all sorts of, examples of behavior. Now I basically teach my clients how to create a boundary in order to protect themselves either emotionally or physically. But a lot of times it's emotional protection. Like if you see someone in a rage, and whether they're raging at you directly or just, raging and you don't want to be around it, a boundary is a way to remove yourself from that situation without trying to change them. So that is, that's, I think, super helpful for caregivers versus what we tend to do. I think our default response is to try and change the other person to get them to stop doing whatever they're doing. And that usually falls into the category of a request, right? Like, and I mean, sometimes we say it as stop yelling, or stop yelling at me, or, if you do this, I'm going to do this. It's like threats. And anytime we're trying to get the other person to change, we're essentially making a request. We're asking them to do something different. And a lot of times in heightened emotions, it's just not going to land well. Those are not, heightened emotions are not the times to make requests. They are the times, though, where a boundary can be super helpful. So I hope that's like a little bit of an explanation of the difference there.
I'm seeing two things here when it comes to boundaries. You have boundaries with the person that you're caring for, but then you have to put up boundaries or put them in place. I don't mean to, blocks when I say put up boundaries, but for those around. So that could be other relatives, that could be other family members, whatever it might be, could even be medical staff, whatever it is. It's different set of boundaries that you need to identify and implement to make all of this go as smooth as possible.
Yeah. And I think the way to think about it is because, for one, I think boundaries are not something you want to use in excess. It's not, because it's not about protecting yourself from the world, but it is about identifying when you, and I'm going to use mostly the example of kind of emotional, difficult emotions, but obviously physically, right? If someone is going to hit you, we create a boundary by we get the heck out, we get away, we run, or we try to protect ourselves. But we're not going to talk about that situation because that usually doesn't happen in caregiving. Let's hope. But emotional boundaries. So, to your point, it can be all sorts of examples. Sometimes people have lots of family members who have lots of opinions about how they should be caregiving, or what, opinions maybe you don't want to hear. And an example of a boundary in that case would be, I don't really want to hear your unsolicited advice. Let's say you're talking on the phone. I'm going to hang up and, we can talk later. That would be a boundary. Like the action is you're not trying to change them. They're giving you unsolicited advice, but you're saying this is not something I'm comfortable with, or you can maybe use the words, I'm not comfortable with this. There's a lot of ways you could say it in a nice way. And your action is you hang up. And that is a way for you to protect yourself emotionally. If that's just something that maybe just drives you crazy, or you find yourself getting angry and irritable, and then you say something you regret, it's probably just better to hang up the phone. A request
can I share something? All right, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, well, a request would be, please don't, please don't give me your opinion on this. I didn't ask for it. And most people, again, if the emotions are heightened, a request doesn't always land well. But it also requires that person, complies, right? It's a two-way street when you make a request, versus a boundary is just something you do on your own for yourself.
So this is in real time. This is a text I'm going to read. I was on the phone with somebody I'm close to late last night, like 11 o'clock. And she got this text, and she's caring for her mother. while her father is in rehab, and her mother has some
Mm.
challenges as well. Usually the father takes care. This text came in from her aunt, the mother's sister.
Yeah.
I'm going to change the names, but it goes like this. Joni, as far as I know, your mother is alone. I've been calling her and Beth too. There is no answer. Called all evening. We are worried. I tried to call you a few minutes ago. No answer. Is she with you? In case you didn't know, this is Aunt Teresa. Now, reasonable, that text came through. She was on the phone with a number of different people, and this text came through 10 something. I want to be accurate here. Less than 20 minutes later, text said, "Thanks for getting back to me." Like just a snarl, like just throwing it out there.
Yes.
And
Yes.
she wanted to know how to reply to this text. And I'm
Yes.
wondering how you would reply to this text.
Yes. Well, for one thing, I would probably recommend picking up the phone, even though that is harder these days. But this is the challenge with text because we do, obviously, like there was some sarcasm or some snarkiness communicated or at least implied, right? And emotions can be very misconstrued in a text format.
Yeah.
So if she replies, and maybe there wasn't, I mean, so let's just say we can just misunderstand, I think, intent very easily in a text. So in that situation, when you feel like a text chain is heading south, it's not going well,
Yeah.
it's harder to do, but pick up the phone. I mean, that is how we be brave in our relationships. We need to actually
Mm,
just say, and it gives you, I would recommend like thinking through what you're going to say, you know,
yes.
but you can start with like, look, I got this text and I kind of got the impression you were upset and because I didn't reply, can we just talk about it for a minute and just start with finding out what's going on. And then, a boundary there though could be like, you mentioned it came in late, like, and I mean, I'm a person that I treasure my sleep and I don't want to get uninterrupted sleep. Or I'm taking care of, my mom, please trust me to do that. Both of those are, maybe areas where you might want to set a boundary. And if the aunt, it feels like the aunt's intrusive or you feel that,
Yep.
you can say, if I'm going to get it, if you text me at 11 o'clock at night, I'm just not going to respond because I need to sleep so I can be able to be my best, or whatever it is. And that's a boundary. You're not telling the aunt not to text, but you're just saying, hey, if you do, I'm not going to respond because of this reason. And here's the thing though, this is the importance this is why I say you don't want to just boundaries should be used sparingly because people don't like them.
Mm,
Other people, it's still hard, right? It's the aunt maybe will not take that news well, and that's okay. She can manage her own emotions. But, which is why you need to do it. You just want to do it with love for yourself and when you've thought through. Um, because sometimes people don't, when our emotions are heightened, yeah, she's probably not going to understand in that moment,
mm.
so it is more about protecting yourself and kind of setting limits. But the benefit of doing that is you do create, I don't know if the right word is a standard, but an expectation of how you expect to be treated and how you're going to protect yourself when people don't treat you that way. So in that relationship, while that would be challenging to do, it is
Hmm.
hard. But that would communicate to the aunt, like, look, this is my sleep is sacred time here.
Yep.
And regardless, unless it's life threatening, please don't, I'm not going to interrupt my sleep and answer your text at 11 o'clock at night. And she sets that expectation up. So that is where, and when people have clear expectations in relationships, that is actually how we can develop trust and closeness easier than than kind of people pleasing, right? Or giving in. Or on the reverse, when we act out of our emotions, and like don't, we say things that we later regret because we're pissed off or upset or angry. So that type of relationship can, or that type of situation can be kind of a pivotal moment for a relationship. We can either make it worse or we can kind of, make it clearer or more honest.
It's my understanding that the aunt who sent that text is a bit of a Butinsky, if you will. And the person that received the text isn't on the, not that there's bad terms, but doesn't have a
Right.
close relationship. So it kind of
Yeah.
came out of nowhere. And that being said, this wasn't there's been other, I guess, situations with
Yeah.
this person. My suggestion was start with a positive. Thank you for your concern about mom. I apologize for not getting back to you sooner, but I was busy, period.
Yeah.
And boundaries, I don't appreciate your sarcasm, period. And that's it. I don't know if that's off base, but that's my,
Yeah. 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 And I think yes, always there's a starting what you suggested was brilliant in that it's called called a soft opening, and it's how you have a difficult conversation without creating antagonism as you start softly. And by doing that, which was great, like, thank you for your concern, which is valid, right? Most of that text was probably coming from concern. So even though, but the only thing I would just be hesitant on
The
is
sarcasm
I don't
line.
appreciate your sarcasm because it's still a judgment and we don't, yes, the aunt probably has a history of that and the aunt is probably going to do it again. I get all that, but it's probably only going to, I would try to make it a little more neutral, like, please don't text so late or something, because it's just going to be inflammatory and it's not going to change the behavior. She's not going to change, right? But
Okay.
but it is a boundary in the sense that, like, even when we say I don't appreciate that, it's still not going to change anything. It's more like, this is what I will do when you act that way. So I'm just not going to reply. I'm not going to reply to sarcastic comments.
Okay.
That would have been
All
maybe
right.
like,
All right.
yeah,
I like that. Yeah.
yeah, kind of clear, like,
In the future,
and not
I won't
saying
respond to
yes,
sarcastic comments because now
yes,
you're providing an action item, not just your opinion. So
yeah,
if you do this, this is what's going to happen.
yeah. This is what,
That's a great point.
and this is what I will do. I mean, it's really, really, I
Really
can't
good.
emphasize this enough. Like, the goal is not to change another person because I will tell you, it's not going to work. And I'm sure, I don't know this aunt, but we all have an aunt like that or a family member like that. They're going to be that way. They've probably always been that way, and they're going to do the same thing again. And so you're not going to change
You're so
them.
right. You're so right. And it's you took the boundary I was trying to set for my friend
Yeah.
and took it to the level where it's got some purpose. And because if it was just what I said, and I don't appreciate your sarcasm. All right, well, that's your opinion.
Right.
And she
Right.
may
Right.
take it another way and say, well, too bad. That's the way I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah.
So, like you said,
Yeah.
she's not going to change. But
Right.
if you tell her what's going to happen, now you're going to you're giving her detail. If you do this again, this is what's going to happen, i.e., nothing's going to happen. You're not going to reply. So
Right. Right.
in the
Right.
future, I won't reply to sarcastic texts or whatever, but
Right.
you're telling her what to anticipate. So that's
Yes.
brilliant.
Yes. And again, because I know people, we do this naturally. We kind of, we can use boundaries or this idea that, like, as threatening, as manipulative, like, and I could give another example, like, let's just say, like, a husband-wife situation. If you do that again, I'm going to leave you. We kind of threaten. And that's where boundaries should really be. They need to be about yourself and your own and love for yourself
Yep.
and the other person. I always like to include and the other person. Like the aunt, yeah, I'm sure she loves her, but they're not super close, probably not her favorite person, not her favorite relative. But out of love for herself, so she doesn't lose her mind with the aunt, right?
Mm-hmm.
I, she can say, I'm just not going to reply to your, to sarcasm. And that's fine. Like, this is what I'm going to do. You do you. I'll do me. It's kind of another way of saying you do you, I'll do me with love for everybody around in all
Yep.
of our imperfectness. We all got our flaws. And so I just want to make sure that people hear that because I do think it's tempting. We want to think that our behavior can like it could be easy to use a boundary as a kind of to manipulate or to
Right.
try to get someone to behave differently. And that's just a slippery slope. It's not useful. It's not a kind of the thing you want to. And then we do that. I mean, we just do that naturally. Sometimes we do that unconsciously. So it's just something you really always want to be aware of. Always think of love for yourself and for them.
Well, that's an interesting point. When I'm going to send a text or email, I put it through a filter. And obviously, if it's one of these types, you wait before you respond. Don't do it. Don't just hammer away. Tap the brakes. And the filter is basically, is it kind? Your reply. Is it kind? Is it necessary? Is it for the greater good?
Oh, I love that. Yes.
So it goes through that filter and, is it kind? Well, you could put up a boundary and be kind about it. Yeah. Is it necessary? In this instance, I think it's necessary with this particular text to reply, but also let you know what's going to happen next time you're sarcastic. And is it for the greater good? Well, that's, I guess, maybe an opinion, but for the communication to be a little more fluid, maybe it is for the greater good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in that example too, I think the greater good is a relationship that works for both of them that can continue, right? Like, so and the opposite being that if someone is a people pleaser and they just capitulate and they say, oh, I'm so sorry for not getting back to you, and they just kind of like people please the aunt, that's not for the greater good of your friend, right? She's going to end up feeling ultimately she'll end up feeling stepped upon and
depleted.
It will.
Sure.
Yes, exactly. And so this is a way, boundaries are also, I think, for the greater good is of that, this is how we can interact and kind of respect each other for who we are.
Sure.
And yet have some limits, like I'm not going to let you stomp on me by doing these things, and you can still do your thing, but these are how I'm going to behave, So I think I love that. Yes.
Fabulous that we talked about this today because it's so important as a caregiver. I believe it comes up all the time, right down to the person you're caring for.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a loving boundary because you have to love yourself before you can take care of somebody else. So you have to protect yourself too. Marika, how do we find you? You're like no other. There's nobody else I know that does what you do. Never even heard of it, and so important.
Yeah, there's not a lot of people who do focus on caregiving, but there are out there. So find me on my website. It's coachmarika.com. So super easy to find. And I do have a podcast on there as well. You'll see the episodes are on there. A way to set up a consultation with me is all on the website, as well as like some blog articles all around caregiving. I focus specifically on the relationship of caregiving for a partner, whether through illness or disease or disability. But yeah, my website is the best place to find me.
And just coachmarika.com?
Coachmarika.com. Yes.
Marika. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yes. Thank you, Steve. It's
Appreciate
fun
it.
as
We'll
always.
talk soon. Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Sounds good.
We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.